Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Tiny Talks workshop. I'm Leanne Fleischer, and if you've ever called member support, you might have gotten me on the line. I'm happy to see all you guys here tonight. Tonight we have a very important discussion on our founder and CEO of NOAA Certified is going to be chatting with you guys about some important information. So we're glad you're here, and we'll have the recording, the presentation that I can send out to you guys in case you miss it or if you want to listen in again. But with that, I think I will hand it over to Robin Butler, our CEO and founder of NOAA. Robin, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming on. And these are exciting times in the tiny house industry world. So it's we're going into some I would say kind of difficult times in our economy and with a lot of things going on. But the tiny house world is standing strong. We continue to grow, and we get support from other people, and the people are starting to recognize, see us, and that is a good thing in a lot of ways, and not so good in some other ways. And so we're going to kind of be talking about today really what I consider the survival of the tiny house industry as it is right now. What is happening, in case you haven't heard, and maybe you were in a box somewhere, but the tiny houses, the industry is trying to be what I call assimilated into some other areas, for instance, into the building codes, into the mobile home standards and codes, and into the modular world. And so what they're trying to do, you're either an RV and you get assimilated into the RV standard, or you're a modular home, or you're a mobile home, and you get assimilated into that standard. And so I don't want to get into all the details, but there's powers that be out there, political forces and everything, that would like for us to all get into some existing standards and codes and methodologies. The challenge with that is that we're a totally different animal than anything else that's out there. And if we get assimilated, we've had all these standards and codes ever since the tiny house movement started. The standards and codes haven't changed except for Appendix Q. Everything else is still the same. So why can't we just say, okay, let's build these tiny houses and make them legal and live in them full time and use the existing standards? And the problem is that they just don't exist, especially standards for chassis. There's no prescriptive standard in IRC for a metal chassis like a trailer frame as a floor system, and there's nothing in there for foundation. So I have a slide presentation I want to go through, and then Eric Freed from Larimer County, Colorado, is going to come on and talk about this issue and in a letter that he wrote. And so without further ado, first of all, I want to welcome everybody and say thank you for coming on and responding and to our email. And I think it's an important time. We have about 12 to 18 months, I think, before we really are going to be having to either put up or get out, kind of a thing. So that being said, let me share my screen. And this is we're going to be talking about how the tiny house regulations kind of have happened along the way here. For the next 30 minutes, we'll be talking about the confusion of tiny houses for building and zoning departments. Then we're also going to be talking about tiny houses as RVs or something else. And then finally, we want to talk about tiny houses as a modular hybrid or a vehicular home in that respect. So this first slide is just a quick overview of what's the confusion. Is it a travel trailer? Is it a park model RV? Is it a mobile home or a manufactured home? And is it a modular home? That's been the confusion. The DOT says, no, it's not an RV. And the building departments say, well, it's not a home. It can't be, it's not built to the, I'll say Colorado Building Code because Eric's on, but Florida Building Code, California Building Code. It's not to the building code, so it's not a home. So it's kind of been in the gray area for the last several years, and what we've been in about 7 years, we've been in this gray area, but that gray area is starting to go away, basically because consumers that are out there that are getting tiny houses that aren't up to snuff and starting to complain, and legislators are starting to come into the play. So that's the big rub. So if there are tiny houses as RVs, if they're built as RVs, there's some advantages. I mean, some people are saying, well, we don't get taxed, but here's my feeling on the taxes, guys. If you're going to live in your home and you're going to use the roads and you're going to use the schools and the police department and all that, you really need to pay some kind of ad valorem tax. I understand it's not real estate. So my heart is we need some changes in the laws so that you can live in your tiny house on wheels or movable tiny home, but you do pay your fair share so that the rest of the community doesn't have to bear your burden. And there's no permits and inspections and that kind of thing when you place your tiny house. At least up to this point, there hasn't been. We have had some issues where, or some places where if you're going to put your tiny house there, yeah, we won't inspect the tiny home if it's built to the ANSI 119.5, but we do inspect the utility hookups, and we do inspect the foundation and those types of things. But the challenges is when you do when you do a tiny house RV, they're not built for full-time habitation. They are for temporary and seasonal use only. And the jurisdictions, if they're going to allow you to live full-time in your RV, they have to come in and say, okay, you can live in your RV full-time, and they have to make that determination. And like California is doing it right now because of the crisis in housing. And what they're saying is they're going to the city council and the county council and say, you have a housing crisis. Yes. Okay. Well, here's a solution to your housing crisis. Let us put tiny houses in. And they say, okay. And then the building code official says, no, this is built like an RV. And they say, well, I don't care. We're going to let it in because we have such a housing. So there's this battle that's going on right now. And then there's the consumer RV laws. There's been so many unscrupulous car dealers out there over the years that the consumer RV laws the consumer vehicle laws are so stringent that if you're going to build a tiny house RV, I'll give you one for instance. They have these lemon laws. And so let's say you have a window that leaks and you go out 2 times to fix that window and it doesn't fix that window. With the current lemon law, that's a lemon. And so now you have to take that house back and give them all their money back. You also have to be, if you're in the RV world, you have to be registered with the state as a manufacturer. And there's some bonding involved and insurance is involved, which is not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's not overbearing. But then you also have, you can't be the dealer. You have to have a dealer. You can't be the manufacturer and the dealer. So there's a lot of RV style laws across the 50 states that are going to be difficult if we're going to be falling into the RV category. And then obviously the RVs depreciate after 15 years. They usually leak and they depreciate. Whereas we hope that to have the general public say, no, these aren't RVs. They're homes. They're built like homes. They're appreciating in value. And they're going to be worth more down the road than in 15 years from now than they are today. And then the oversight, RVs oversight, basically you have a manufacturing plant, you have a quality assurance manual that you give to the jurisdiction. You are basically, as a third party, you are an arm of the state or the county. Usually it's a state arm. And these third-party inspectors have a program that the state approves and says, okay, it looks like you know what you're doing. You've got the expertise to do these inspections. You've already gone out to the plant and inspected the plant. You've seen 3 houses that are have been built, and now we're going to let you go ahead and build for the next 90 days or so, and we'll pop in every so often and see how you're doing. Well, there's something wrong with that program. I had somebody that was with RVIA before he came to NOAA, and he said that RVIA gave them 120 seals, and they visited them every 12 to 18 months. So the bottom line, there's a lot of houses that are being built that don't have eyes on them from any third party in that program. And so we don't like that program for dwellings. We want safe dwellings that people are going to be living in full time. But how about a site-built house? A site-built house is inspected at various stages of construction, and at the end of the day, they're going to receive a certificate of occupancy upon completion of that house. And that, to me, is a better avenue to come up with for our tiny houses on wheels, rather than calling it an RV and going down that path. It would be to build it more to a standard specifically for specifically for tiny houses, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. So anyway, that's why I feel like the jurisdictions have not embraced everything with open arms, because of the issues with it's an RV and they're built for temporary and seasonal housing. And so what's been happening around the country, in California and other places, is they've taken this definition of a movable tiny home. It's built on a transportable body with a single chassis, year-round residence with provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, sanitation when it's connected to the utilities necessary for operation of installed fixtures and appliances. But if you drop down, it says here that it cannot exceed 400 square feet, and it's constructed to an ANSI 119.5 standard. And then this one, they don't all say it, but this one says it's certified by an engineer that it's built to that standard. So here's the problem with that. Number one, ANSI is a standard that is only for 8'6" or wider units, but if it's mandated by the local municipality to use that standard, then obviously we want to use that standard. And it's still an RV standard, still for seasonal and temporary housing. In the ANSI standard, you can use 2x3 studs. You can use R5 insulation in the walls and the floors, and R7 in the ceiling. It's woefully insufficient for a dwelling or something that someone's going to live in full time. And then in other places, they're just saying you can live full time. An ADU by LA said that's movable tiny houses that are built to ANSI 119.5 are permissible, and houses are permissible and permanently habitable. So they can be lived in full time. In Arizona, they just said a park model can be lived in full time. In San Luis Obispo, they did a little bit, at least a little bit. They said that they need to be built to ANSI 119.5, but they took our ANSI Plus standard and said we want some more insulation. So they said R13 in the walls and floors and R19 in the ceilings. They didn't take all of our pluses, but they did take that one and added it to it. And they said you have to leave the wheels on, take the wheels off, and now it has to be built to California building code. And then Maine just basically gave everybody a carte blanche. You know, if tiny home means this living space, and it had that whole definition, permanent living quarters, and they said either ANSI 119.5 or NFPA 1192, which is the travel trailer standard. The NFPA 1192 has 0 structural in it. They did say can't exceed 400 square feet, and it can't move on its own power. And then they said it doesn't include a trailer, a semi-trailer, a camp trailer, a recreational vehicle, or manufactured housing. So they exempted out some of those. And I'm sorry, I'm going pretty quick on this, but if something isn't clear, put something in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you, and we'll stop and answer any questions that you might have. Blaine County, Idaho came to us, and we sat in there by Zoom, their county council meeting, and they interviewed us and vetted what we do here at NOAA very carefully. And they finally came out with this ordinance that all tiny homes on wheels are required to meet the ANSI 119.5 standard and the NOAA ANSI Plus standard that we've put together. And we gave them a link and access to that. And it has to be inspected at stages 1 through 5 of the most recent ANSI Plus standard inspection guidelines. and certified complete and approved by NOAA and submitted to Plain County Zoning Department. So their building code official called me and said, we really don't like to have to allow these things in, but I can swallow it if you can add to the NOAA ANSI Plus standard R28 in the ceiling and R21 in the walls and the floors for Blaine County, Idaho, which we did. And so they passed this ordinance, and now NOAA is and it has to be inspected like NOAA, but does not have to be inspected by NOAA. They said the proposed movable tiny home has been certified by a third-party inspection agency, i.e. NOAA or other approved administrator as meeting the ANSI 119.5 standard, ANSI Plus, NOAA ANSI Plus, and standards in Section D, which are the R28 and the R21. So I just threw out the question here, guys. Could NOAA certified be the authority having jurisdiction for tiny houses? I don't know. I don't know if we want to take that on or not. We stuck our neck out in 2015 when we started, when there wasn't any oversight. And along the way, we've developed an inspection process that seems to work across the nation. And we've developed a standard that jurisdictions are interested in and are liking. So let's move on to the Colorado state statute. They have in July passed a state statute bringing the tiny houses into the modular home arena. They can be permanent living quarters, but in that mandate, they said that in promulgating the rules under this section, the board shall consider. Doesn't say they have a 15-member board, 2 people from the tiny house industry, not a board, a task force, a TAC, that is mandated to come up with something by next July. And this was in that statute. They need to consider the importance of keeping tiny homes affordable, the unique characteristics of tiny homes, such as size constraints and construction on a chassis, so they can be moved from site to site, so they can still be movable, so that many tiny homes are built by shops producing fewer than 20 units per year. So you guys who are on the call are probably smaller manufacturers of tiny houses. And so this would really affect you. In the current modular home program, it's more for the Champion Homes and the Clayton Homes, where they have a factory and they're building, mass producing a lot of homes out of that factory. And this was supposed to take in consideration the tiny house manufacturers that build fewer than 20 per year, and that many of these homes aren't cookie cutters, they're custom built, and that many homes are built by their owners. And in the home building industry, if you want to build a site-built home, you own a lot, you can in many jurisdictions go and get an owner builder permit to build your own home. So there's no reason in my mind why we couldn't also have that same thing in this ordinance or the statute in Colorado. And the only way that I see that we can do that is to have an inspection process that doesn't involve you having to have a quality assurance manual, have a factory, have people show up in person doing inspections on every phase of the home. It would just be too cost prohibitive in my mind to do that. So this is this is kind of like a together with the help of some other people, showing you what are the different things that are out there. First, we have the tiny house on foundation. The AHJ is the city or the county and the zoning departments. It's usually constructed on a permanent foundation built on site. It's built to a derivative of the International Residential Code, or every state puts amendments onto IRC except for one, and adopts some version. Sometimes it's a 2015, 2018, 2021. Sometimes they adopt a PENS-Q, sometimes they don't. But it's inspected by the local building department. The typical size is 400 square feet or less as considered tiny, and you will go to CO with that. Factory built homes are the same thing. The only difference is the codes are the same. CO is the same. The only difference is a third party approved by the state does the inspection on that home, and you will get an insignia from the third-party agency that's provided by the state that they put on that unit, and they have a data plate on the unit that shows the manufacturer, the date of manufacturer, and some other information, the zone that it's was inspected to and built to, and stuff like that. And with that insignia, the building code official will come out and he'll see that insignia on the house, and all he's got to look at is the foundation and the utility hookups. Then you have your manufactured home, which is very similar to the factory built or modular home. But it's built on a chassis, not on and that chassis stays with that home. And it's built to the HUD code, not the local building code. That's a difference there. It's built by a third-party agency, though, and they can go down to 320 square feet if they have to for that. But normally I don't see that many HUD homes built to 320 square feet, and you will get a CO for that. Now let's jump over to the park model and the RVs. The park model, we'll start with the RVs. That's just what's called a travel trailer. The Motor Vehicle Administration regulates that, Department of Highway and Transportation Safety Administration. They are built in a factory. They're mass produced. They're built to a NFPA 1192. And I want to say NFPA 70, National Electric Code, everything has to meet that, whether you're building to a state building code or a HUD code or an RV. Everybody has to follow along with the National Electric Code. However, in National Electric Code, there's Article 551 for travel trailers and Article 552 for parks and park models that you pay close attention to. But everything has to be National Electric Code. Then you get certified by a third party. And the only difference between the park model and the travel trailer is the ANSI 119.5 does have some structural standards, even though, and energy standards, even though they're woefully insufficient, but they're designed for seasonal and recreational occupancy only. So we jump over here to I should have colored that gray instead of green, but the gray area of tiny homes or a movable foundation still have if you're going to put it somewhere, you still have the authority having jurisdiction, being the city or the county or the state that would have to be involved in it. They are prefabricated off-site. They're either built to the NOAA standard, plus standard, the ANSI standard, the NFPA 1192 standard. And we do have one city in Sitka, Alaska, that's requiring them to be built to IRC. We now have another jurisdiction in Lake Dallas, Texas, that has to be IRC. And so NOAA has ICC certified inspectors that can inspect to IRC if you need your home built to that standard. The only trouble we're having with is obviously the chassis that goes with that. So, and we can talk about that. We'll be talking about that in just a minute. Tiny homes usually range from about 150 to 400 square feet. I can't see getting, I mean, even though they're built smaller, I've seen some 70 square feet, but in order to meet IRC, you have to have at least one room that's 70 square feet with called a bedroom with no walls less than 7 square feet. Then you have to have, cooking and all the other stuff and sleeping and you have to have a bathroom and all that. And in order to get all that, you need about 150 to 170 square feet. So I just put in here 150 to 400 square feet. And then they're designed, they can be designed as temporary, or they can be permanent residences if the building departments say yes to that, or the local jurisdictions say yes to an ANSI standard, or if they did like the other jurisdictions that said, yeah, what they did is they amended Appendix Q to include a chassis. And so now we can build to IRC in that jurisdiction. And so we say that the NOAA inspected and certified tiny houses built to the NOAA Plus standard are more suitable for full-time habitation. We can't say they are suitable for full-time habitation because they are not approved in all areas. So that being said, let's move on to Eric Freed is the building code official for Larimer County. And he is on the line here. I wanted to bring him on to talk about what's going on in the ASTM world and the ASTM initiative. And so, Eric, you have written a letter regarding that. I want to pull this letter up on here and let you talk a little bit about it. Why did you write this letter and what's it all about?
Well, I've kind of gotten pulled into the whole politics of whether or not ASTM should develop a tiny house standard. I think one is needed. Robin's laid it out very well. Tiny houses don't quite fit into HUD or IRC or RVs or park model RVs or travel trailers. And I think that, as a local building official, if something, most building officials, let me say, if something comes to the site on wheels, they consider it a vehicle. It's not a house, as you mentioned. If it's going to be lived in permanently, we need some kind of standard that's appropriate to tiny houses. And so when I heard ASTM was maybe going to set up a standards committee, I thought that was a great idea. Unfortunately, ICC, the International Code Council, of which we're a member, although we don't always see eye to eye, they've been opposing this and they've dragged it out for a long time. And their point of view was, we don't need a new standard. You can build a tiny house under the IRC. And there's Appendix Q. But as you all know, I think Appendix Q just gives you flexibility on stairs, lofts, egress windows, ladders, a few things like that. It doesn't do anything about anything structural or there's a little bit about energy in there too. That's true. And basically the IRC requires you to build a house and transfer all the load through the exterior walls and any interior bearing elements to a foundation of all-weather wood, masonry, or concrete that's below the frost depth of the foundation. That's the only way to build a house on the IRC. And I've asked a bunch of other building officials, have you ever seen a tiny house built in the IRC? And I haven't met one yet, although David Tompos of ICC NTA says, oh yeah, we see those all the time. And so that this was going back and forth. I think, as everyone knows, ASTM did not set up a new tiny home standards committee, but they made it a subcommittee under their EO6 committee. I think it's condition of buildings or existing buildings or something. And that just happened. Part of the problem with the delay is the Colorado law that I helped work on requires the State Division of Housing to adopt a tiny house standard by next July 1st, so that tiny houses can start coming out with placards on them, and people like me can know that somebody, either the state or a certified third-party inspector, looked at the wiring, the framing, the gas piping, everything, and it's safe. That's my concern mainly. So by delaying it, it's making it harder and harder for ASTM to get this standard done. And then interestingly, just before the final vote, I guess, on whether to create a subcommittee under EO6, ICC comes out, I think the week before, with a press release. We've published our new 2020 International Tiny House Provisions. So the timing, if I was a cynical person, I would say it was released to influence that vote, but I'm not going to say that. And so I was curious, and I bought the PDF for my jurisdiction because it was 2,000 pages, and I couldn't figure out what was going to fill 2,000 pages of tiny house information. Well, basically, they just reprinted existing things. And so I wrote this little review, which I sent that off to Janet Tomey, I think, and Mike Schmidt of Ensemble Ventures, in case they wanted to use it in their discussions with ASTM for the subcommittee. Basically, it's just they reprinted the entire International Residential Code, kind of to reinforce the idea that you can and should and must build a tiny house if it's going to be a dwelling under the residential code. And the only thing they did is, instead of having Appendix AQ at the back, they cut it into sections and they put each section where it would normally go in the building code. And interestingly, it only went into chapters 1, 2, and 3, the administrative section, definitions, in chapter 3. So nothing from Appendix Q went into any of the structural chapters. I think one section went into chapter 11. And then the rest of it was their proposed tiny house model legislation, which I think would cut NOAA out of the picture. I'm not sure, maybe it wouldn't. Maybe as long as NOAA inspectors were certified to do IRC inspections, they could still do it. And they reprinted their new offsite construction standards, which they came out with late last year, early this year, and the federal HUD standards. And ICC's position has been that tiny homes over 320 square feet must be built to the HUD standards, which I think is debatable. I think only if you're trying to get it HUD certified. So I wasn't overly impressed with this ICC publication, which cost me a fair amount of money, but even I get a discount because I'm an ICC member. So I just put that out there quickly so people could look at it. And I didn't expect it to get, put out there very much, but you guys are using it, and think Janet told me put it on her tiny house blog. So at some point, I expect ICC to come knocking on my door and telling me I'm not being a loyal team player or something like that. But I think the most important thing is there has to be a standard appropriate to tiny houses. So the more tiny houses can be built, they can come to the site with some kind of certification on them so people like me know they're safe and they can be approved to live in year round. And that's really what everyone's trying to do. I think we're all on the same side. We want to build safe, affordable, tiny houses that people can live in because more and more people want to live in them.
Absolutely. And in this, guys, just to point out, this is called the 2021 International Tiny House Provision, but it came out on September 9th of 2022. That was kind of a interesting, let's just say it's interesting that it was called the 2021 International Tiny House Provision. And that the most of it was reprints of what existing codes and standards in HUD and IRC but the thing I wanted to point out was that they're saying, yeah, you can build to IRC, and I think you alluded to that somewhere in here about if you get an engineer. Here it is. It says they're either required to use a concrete masonry or all-weather footing foundation system extending below the frost line. So it's either got to be that, or you have to get approval by using an engineer for a specific to that tiny home in that area and get the engineer to design the foundation system and everything. And then, yes, well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but if you get an engineer to certify that the 4 trees you built your tree house in will support that structure, then you can build your tree house to IRC. I may be way off the ball with that one, but what do you think?
Yeah, the IRC is prescriptive designs basically, so you can, it's like, cookbook, you can follow it. But if you can't follow the prescriptive, you can have an engineer design and that takes precedence. So yeah, for my own work, if I had an engineer design for a treehouse and Colorado Engineer had stamped off on using the trees and it would support all the loads and it met egress requirements, et cetera, I would approve it. So, and the thing is, where we are in Larimer County, you typically need an engineered foundation anyway, just because of really bad soils. But the idea is to come up with some kind of prescriptive, temporary foundation standard or temporary/permanent, so it can be on the ground but attached and not have to come up with a special design each time. And so I think ICC is throwing up unnecessary roadblocks personally, but that's just my opinion. That's not the official position of Larimer County.
Can you address the below the frost line issue? You had mentioned something that you didn't think that was necessarily a requirement because of the size of the tiny house.
Well, it's not so much that, but typically you have to build a foundation that goes where we are 30 inches below grade. It could be 36, could be 48 up in the mountains, depends on where you are. And most people don't want to do that. They want to have something that will bolt the tiny house to the ground somehow, so it's not going to blow over or get disturbed in a heavy snowstorm, but can be detached and then moved somewhere else. So it's not so much the size of the tiny house. There are code provisions for non-habitable structures below a certain size. We don't have to go down below the frost line. But I think the concern there is you build something on the ground, it's going to transfer heat into the ground, and then the moisture in the ground freezes and thaws and you get heaving and causes structural problems. But tiny houses, kind of like manufactured homes, are already self-contained, insulated in the floor. So they shouldn't really, and they're not really on the ground, they're above the ground. So I'm thinking we're going to wind up with something with a skirting and then some kind of tie down system, maybe a vector system kind of thing to tie it to the ground. So I don't really see the same heat transfer and thawing and heaving problem that you would have with a typical house built on the ground. And I doubt a lot of tiny houses are going to have basements under them, just from what I've seen of tiny houses. They're usually smaller than that. They're probably going to be on either crawl space or just, above ground skirting kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And really that's what this call to our builders is right now is, guys, we did get the ASTM subcommittee passed, and Colorado is requiring something in the realm of codes and standards. And so we need to be the voice, I guess you could say, because something's going to get adopted by July 30th, because it has to be, and something's going to be adopted after that in the other states. And yeah, things can change, but once something's adopted, it's hard to make a change. So what I've always said is, if you want to have something that you can live with, at least get your voice out there and say, this is what I think will work. This is what I won't think will work. There's a lot of other Eric Frieds out there that have ideas about things, and you guys have been building these things, so you have ideas about these things. So hopefully I'm going to be on the ASTM committee. I don't know for sure. I've also applied to get on the Colorado committee of one of the two people that would be on that committee to write standards and codes. Don't know if I'm going to get that or not, but my thing is we need to be having a conversation. We have 245 of you out there building tiny houses across the nation, and it's not just Colorado, and it's not just California, Texas, or Florida. It's all over that that this is pushing out into. It's come from in the gray area to now with a few lawsuits. I've seen more lawsuits in the last 6 months about things that are going on in the tiny houses with, moisture issues and electrical issues and guardrails and handrails. And so we're kind of past the time of being able to sneak in under the radar, and we need to come out into the open and say, okay, we do need some standards, and we do need a keep them affordable, and we do need to make it so that the smaller manufacturer and the owner builder and I like the schools. I want to make a big play for, we need carpenters and plumbers and electricians, and those schools that are building tiny houses are teaching our kids the trades that we need. We're really deficient on right now. So that being said, every Tuesday, I would love to have you guys come on, and I will update you on what's going on with the ASTM initiative. I want you to bring your ideas, your thoughts of how this should look like. And then if we're not an influencer, I'll try to find out who the influencer is on these things, so that we can, as a group of tiny house manufacturers that have a stake in all of this, that we can create something that we can all live with. So I think my last slide, I just said it's not an RV, it's not a site-built or modular or factory-built house, it's not a HUD home, it's a hybrid vehicle home that needs its own standards and codes for homes that are built under 400 square feet. And it's not inspected like a modular, but it still is built in a factory, brought out like a modular. So an inspection process like NOAA would certainly be my vote. Of course, we've been doing it for 7 years, and we see the positive side of things. We've produced what I think is the gold standard for inspection and certification of tiny homes. So we need a remote oversight of all the builds. And I'm going to end with this, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. We did a call with a trailer manufacturer on the end of our challenge, and he's building 400 to 450 tiny trailers a year. And I know the big one is TrailerMade, and he's building probably more than half of the trailers that are manufactured by him. And then there's Eagle. The point is, NOAA has only inspected 700 and something and seals. We've only sent out 700 and something seals so far. So if there's 1,000 or more tiny homes that are being built a year, some of them aren't being inspected by the RV industry. Some of them are. Some of them are being inspected to the NOAA Plus standard, but a lot of them are just being built. And hopefully, cross your fingers that these guys know what they're doing. And Colorado has a grandfathered in provision in their statute for those of you that have units that are already built and sold and placed in Colorado. And hopefully they'll meet those. But what what I like about our program is all of our inspections are digitized and stored. So if you're in Colorado and they say, you know, I want to see how your tiny house was built, we can go back to 2016 and pull your records, and here's the video, here's the photos, here's the inspector notes, and they can see everything and hopefully feel the warm and fuzzies when they're trying to grandfather your home into the state of Colorado. So that being said, I do want to say one more thing, and then I'll open it up. I talked with one builder in Colorado, and Eric, if you're still on, maybe you can confirm this, but he was going to move out of Colorado into Utah, and he's going to build most of his stuff in Utah, and that just the homes that he's building in Colorado would fall under the statute. But maybe not. I don't know. I know that there's some hefty teeth in this statute, some hefty fines, and he's worried that if he doesn't meet everything in that statute, that he's going to be heavily fined, and so he's moving out. But I thought that only the units that were coming into Colorado had to meet whatever standard that they have. And but I guess if you are a manufacturer in Colorado, no matter where the home is going, you could fall under that. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but can you kind of talk to our builders here and see if they need to move out of the state or not if this thing passes?
Well, I wouldn't recommend moving out of the state, but it's really what you need to do is get involved in the rulemaking. And Robin, whether you're on that committee or not, those technical advisory committee meetings, which are supposed to start November 1st, I heard today, they're open public meetings. People can join via Zoom. And really, you know, the law is kind of the broad outline, and the key is in the rules that get adopted. So I know any home coming into the state of Colorado, if it's going to be used as a house and not an RV, is going to have to meet certain rules, which haven't been, you know, adopted yet for how they're manufactured and how they're inspected and all that. We basically put tiny homes under the manufactured home program, but in its own category, because we understand it's a different thing. But the state already has a whole program set up to certify installers and manufacturers and dealers. And so rather than reinvent the wheel, tiny homes go under that. And those are the existing fines that are there. And my experience is the state is not going around looking to come down on people with a hammer and hit them with the maximum fine. But when someone continually is in violation and doesn't come up to standards and doesn't comply, then they can fine them like, you know, $10,000 or whatever it was. And that's also a consumer protection measure. If someone is selling tiny homes or modular homes and they're not getting inspected, they're not getting tagged, then they can be hit with that. But I don't know if it affects homes built in Colorado that are being sent out of state. So that's a question we'll have to get back to people on. I know it would affect any homes built in Colorado, placed in Colorado, or any homes coming into Colorado.
Yeah, that's my understanding also. However, if you are registered as a manufacturer in Colorado, I would think that you could be scrutinized no matter where the home is going, you could be scrutinized as a manufacturer there. But I don't know. I guess those are some of the questions that we really need to address going forward and try to figure this stuff out so that that we can have our voice heard on all of this. All right. Are there any questions, Leanne, that we need to answer before we kind of wrap things up here?
There are no current questions in the chat, but if you guys have any questions you would like answered,
Just
feel
raise your
free to
hand.
raise your hand or put it in the chat.
And we'll give you just a minute on that. And while we're doing that, I'm going to say thank you, Eric, for coming on and spending some of your valuable time with us. We're really honored to have you here and appreciate your coming into it. And we need more people like you, I think, in the world that can look at something not from, you know, this is the law and we've got to put this, I think you called it a round peg in a square hole, you know. We're not going to do that. You know, we need to have something specifically for tiny houses on wheels. So guys, if there's no other questions or anything.
Wait, time out. We do, Ron would like to know, can you tell us what Appendix Q is in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, it's Appendix AQ right now in the 2021. And it basically is in the appendix of IRC. When the different municipalities or different states adopt building code, they'll adopt the 2015 or whatever IRC with amendments, and they can adopt appendices if they want along with it. And in the appendix Q, it talks about rise and run of your stairs, and it's a lot bigger than the normal IRC. You can get by with actually a 12-inch rise in the formula that they have there. They have a landing at the top of the at there, and then what's the headroom on top of that landing? So they address access. You can use ship's ladders. You can use alternating treads. So they talk about access to the loft with that, and then they talk about how do you decide how big a loft is. It has to be 35 square feet. Well, how do you measure that? How far in do you have to come from the roof line to start your measurement for that 35 square feet? And then they require a IRC egress window, not an RV egress window. The RV egress window, you can go 24 by 17 tall ellipsoid, but with the second floor of IRC, it's got to be 5.7 square feet, 20 inches wide, 24 inches tall, and it has to have 44 inches to the sill, which would be a problem in a tiny house loft, I don't think. But they say in appendix Q, you can put in a skylight that would meet those requirements. So you can read it. It's on our website. If you have access to our back office, we have appendix Q right there for you to read, and probably a good idea for it to go over if you're going to be building tiny houses with lofts. Anybody else? Is that it, Leanne?
Well, Tasha made a comment and Eric wanted some clarification. She said, it sounds like what they did in Colorado was absolute laziness. What a complete disservice to the people, especially those that need affordable housing.
Well, I'm going to address that, and then I'm going to turn it over to Eric if he wants to address it. The challenge is, the problem is that there are some builders out there that are unscrupulous, and they don't get certified. And I've got an 85-year-old lady right now that it has a degenerative disease, that her tiny house is leaking. She paid a lot of money for it, and she's getting shocked when she plugs something into an outlet. I mean, that's a real life instance. And then we had another one of our manufacturers that had a 15 amp circuit running to the kitchen outlet, and which is, not legal. It has to be a 20 amp circuit. In fact, you're supposed to have two 20 amp circuits. So I spent 40 minutes with our resident electrical expert, talking to him about why he needs to change that one wire out and the wire for the house he already had built and closed up. And he said, no, I'm just canceling my NOAA membership. I don't need to do that in order to sell my houses. And now somebody out there is walking around or plugging things into a 15 amp circuit that should be a 20 amp circuit, which is at least going to pop breakers and might possibly be a fire hazard. So my take on it is, yeah, we've lived and we've done the best we can with oversight, and NOAA's done the best they can with making sure people do the right things. But because there are people out there that are building whatever on whatever, the jurisdictions are coming in and need to come in. And Eric, you can answer anything you want on that too.
Yeah, I think it was just a miscommunication on my part. I think Tasha heard me say that in Colorado, they copied and pasted the building code and tried to apply it to tiny houses. I was actually talking about the International Code Council, which is the national group that publishes the IRC and the IBC and everything else. And they've been fighting against having an ASTM standards committee to come up with something specifically appropriate to tiny houses. They've been saying, well, just build it under the IRC. And my contention is that you can't, you can, but nobody builds a tiny house under the IRC. It wasn't Colorado. What the Colorado action says that the law says that the state will develop a standard by next July. Could be the IRC, could be the ASTM standard, could be something else that actually fits tiny houses better. So they're actually trying to come up with something and not just cram it into the existing code rules, not just say, well, it's either got to be a RV or a HUD home or an IRC home. So I think maybe just as I went over quickly, I was unclear about who was doing what, but I was involved with the state bill and our legislator and the Division of Housing. And, I think actually it's a lot of work for the Division of Housing. It's a big lift maybe the first in the country to come up with comprehensive standards. So hopefully that explains it a little more clearly.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. We do have Paul has a question. He's in North Carolina. Is this going to become something the DMV will get involved in? Right now, it's just a title for a trailer.
Well, in some places like California, you get a title for the trailer, then you build a tiny house, and then you get a title for the RV. So different places are doing different things. What a lot of tiny house builders are doing, because they don't want to fall into the RV world and all the rules and requirements, they basically just keep the title on the trailer and put a tiny house on that trailer, and then sell that with a bill of sale, sell what's sitting on the trailer with a bill of sale. But it is just bringing to the light that we really need some standards that everybody's going to have to live by, and everybody's going to go to. Because if you're a great tiny house builder, you do everything right, and you follow the rules, and you get certified, and you spend the extra money for a 20 amp, a 12-2 instead of a 14-2 wire, electrical wire. Don't you want those standards to be standard across the board for everybody, so that somebody over here can't just build inexpensively, and then a buyer that's unaware of everything, of what they see a tiny house and a tiny house, they don't know the difference. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, but we don't know what's happening in North Carolina and South Carolina. North Carolina is North Carolina Department of Insurance that regulates all of that, and we have had one tiny house there that the building code official did a special exception on a tiny house in the backyard, and they went and looked at it. They got our NOAA video and photos, and looked at them with the chief electric, chief building, our structural and plumbing, and then they went out and looked at the house, and they gave her a CO to live in her house in the backyard while she fixed her big house. It had mold growing in it. So on a one-off basis, I've seen that, but in the state of North Carolina, if it's not a modular or it's not a HUD home, then it has to be a stick-built house that is inspected by the building code official, building department there.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? That might be it.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to you and let us tell us about tomorrow night. Oh, one more thing I want to say. These Tuesdays are for everyone. You don't have to be a NOAA member in order to get in on this, because we want everyone to be talking about these building codes and standards. If we don't, it's kind of like when you're voting for the president of the United States. If you don't vote, and whoever gets in, you don't get the opportunity to complain about him. So that's the same thing with these codes and standards. I mean, let's get in there, let's get our voices heard, and so let's hopefully get something that's passed that we can all live with. And so all these Tuesdays are open to you. Tell your friends and people that are in your area, even though they're not NOAA members, you're welcome to come on this Tuesday call. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, guys. That was intense, and I know there's a lot of information that we want to talk about. So join us next Tuesday and the following Tuesdays after that. Tomorrow night, if any of you guys are interested in developing a tiny house village, we'll have our developer back, Scott Banta. He is developing a tiny house neighborhood in Volusia County. So he's got all the ins and outs. Bring your notebook to take notes. There was a lot of information he gave last Wednesday, excuse me. So be ready to learn some of that stuff. And I think
Let me jump
you
in
guys
on
are free to
that.
go. Oh,
Let me jump in on that real quick.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Scott is not just the Volusia County guy. He's got material that will apply wherever you are. And the plan is on Wednesdays, those of you that show up on Wednesdays, we'll have and come to the event on February, we'll have everything you need to go out on your own and develop tiny houses in your neck of the woods, a tiny house development, so that's the purpose for the Wednesday nights. So if you guys want to come back tomorrow night, we're going to be having that along the way. And Christina just raised her hand. You want to unmute her, Christy? Unmute Christina so we can see what. Can you do that, Jordan? Or maybe Christina, you need done. There you go.
There we go.
Hello?
Hello, we hear you.
Hi.
Okay, great. So I just actually had a follow-up question, if it would be helpful for us to participate in the meetings in Colorado via Zoom, if, show of numbers of people who are maybe not verbally participating, but just kind of a show of numbers who are, so they know that it does affect a large pool of people.
Mhm.
What do you think, Eric? Are you still on?
I think it couldn't hurt. I mean, if you've got the time, if you want to listen or even half listen, just so
Yeah.
they see that there's a large constituency out there. They say the decisions are largely based on who shows up, or maybe it was Yogi Bear who said that half of life is 90% showing up or something like that. So yeah, if you can make it there, it's probably worth your time.
Okay, great.
We
Yeah,
can get
and you
more
might
info on
learn
that.
Yeah, and you might learn something if you're listening on that, so yeah, good stuff. I'll be there.
Yeah, we'll take notes. If anyone's interested in the recording from this evening, you can email me and we'll be sending that out. So anything else, Robin, you can think of?
I think that's it. You did a good job, everybody. Thank you, Eric, again, and thank you everyone for coming on, and we'll see
Yeah.
you next time.
Thank you so much. You guys have a great evening.